This racket is strung properly. It was strung with 2 pieces of string. There are 16 mains and 18 crosses. If I look at this racket, it looks like the mains skip 7 and 9 in the throat and 7 and 9 at the head. Those are for the first 2 crosses and the last 2 crosses. Also, one thing I noticed about this racket is right down here in the lower left-hand corner, the knot is very, very close to the main string. So I'm going to have to take that into account when I string this racket. One of the first things I need to do is mount this racket. I want to mount the racket so that the bottom post is at the center of the racket and the top post is at the center of the racket. When I do that, the center 2 strings should be on either side of both of those posts. Then, all I have to do is slide in my side supports, adjust the length, slide in the top supports, and I'm done. I'm ready to cut the strings out and start. I've got all the strings removed from my racket now. Next thing I want to do is just check to make sure that my supports are all tightened up and everything. I don't get them too tight. They're pretty much just finger tight. Then I'm going to start my mains at the throat of the racket. When I start my mains, I'm going to start it with 1 string on either side of the bottom post or support and the top post or support. Okay, I'm going to pull the 2 ends of my string so that I can make sure that I've got the same length of string on each end, and make sure that when I'm pulling the strings through, that down here at the bottom I don't kink the string. When I string the racket now, I'm going to pull tension on 2 strings at a time. And the reason I'm doing that is just so that I can set the tension inside the clamps that I'm using. Right here I've got a set of floating clamps, and I could clamp them in the dead center of the racket. Then when I pull tension on the next string, I can use my frying clamps to clamp down here at the throat of my racket. You'll notice when I've done this now, I've pulled tension on this whole string up to that starting clamp. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the racket. Okay, I'm now pulling tension on the second main on the right side of the racket. I can then move my floating clamp here down to the bottom of the racket. Then I go up to the top of the racket, and all I have to do is continually move this floating clamp from one end to the other, either the throat to the head or the head to the throat. When I'm doing this though, it seems like my fixed clamps are always getting in the way. Then I can just continually do that until I've got all of my mains strung up. If you're using fixed clamps now, what I do is I pull tension on both of the strings, the center 2 mains, and then I clamp the string as far away as I can clamp it inside the frame. Then I pull tension on the opposite string. I've clamped the one on my right, so now I'm pulling tension the one on my left, the one closest to me. Then I'm going to pull tension on the first string again. Doing it this way, I'm not double pulling any of these strings. I'm only using a single pull to pull tension on each of these strings one at a time. I'll string 1 string on one side, which was this one over here, then 2 strings on the other side, which I'm pulling the second one right now. As soon as I pull tension, I release my clamp and move it down to as close as I can get it to the tension head and stay inside the frame. Alright, now that I've got 2 on this side, I'm going to pull 2 on this side, which will bring me up to 3 strings on this side, which will be 1 ahead of the other side. I'll always get to the point where I'm pulling 1 ahead on each side, then I'll switch to the other side. I've now pulled tension on 6 mains on the left side of the racket and 6 mains on the right side of the racket. If I go back to my instructions, it told me to skip the 7th and 9th main in the throat of the racket and the 7th and 9th main in the head of the racket. So I'm going to go through the 8th grommet hole here and route it up to the top into the 8th grommet hole at the top of the racket. And then those holes that I'm skipping are going to be used for my top and bottom crosses. I'm now pulling tension on my very last main string. I've got all my mains on the left side of the racket completed, and this is the last one on the right side of the racket. I'm going to tie my outside main off. Tighten up my knot. Then I'm going to release my clamps. After I release my clamps, I'll cut off the tails of these strings so that they're not in the way, and I'll start my crosses. I'm all ready to start my crosses now, and what I want to do is start this one the same way I started the main, except rather than starting in the center, I'm starting up at the top. I'm going to pull both of these main strings and clamp the strings right over here. Okay, I've got tension pulled. I'm clamping the second main here. Then I'm going to pull the top cross, and I'm going to clamp it with a starting clamp. Okay, now that I've got that done, I'll pull the second cross and clamp it with my opposite cross. Okay, if I would have wanted to use a starting knot, I could have tied my starting knot right here, then pulled my top cross against that starting knot and not used this starting clamp. But the starting clamp seems to work out pretty good because all your knots are going to end up looking the same that way. And I like the way the knot looks for a tie-off knot rather than a starting knot. I'm now pulling tension on the 5th main coming down the racket, excuse me, the 5th cross coming down the racket, and I've clamped it off. What I've done now is both of these clamps right here are pretty much holding the same string. This one, though, is holding the string lower in the racket. So effectively, I could take this clamp off over here if I wanted to, which is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull tension on the top cross again, remove this starting clamp that is higher up the racket, clamp that string, and then tie off this top cross. Well, I told myself I wanted to have this cross go over this last main here, but darned if I didn't go under it. Now the problem I'm going to have is when I pull my knot tight, it's going to be blocked by that string. When I'm pulling on it, I'm pulling in this direction, and that main is stopping my knot from being pulled. Because it's stopping my knot from being pulled, I can't get it as tight, so I have to pull it a couple of times, and when I pull it, it'll pull that main out of the way a little bit, and then I can tighten it up, pull it again, tighten it up, pull it again, tighten it up, and I should be able to rock it back and forth enough, and this main should go be stretchy enough to move out of my way so that it really doesn't mess anything up. Okay, I'm tying my knot now. I just cinch it up and pull down the string and rock it back up. After you do that a couple of times, that main will move out of the way enough so that I don't have a problem. Then I remove my tension, remove my clamps, clip off the tail, and I'm done with the racket. All I need to